What is a universal human being? Stop. Think about that. What is that? It is important that you know this so that you are not left behind. This is what is happening, and out of love, I have developed this inquiry for you to help you in life. Today, I want to take you on a guided journey through the past, present, and possible future of culture. We'll explore it from every angle: sociology, psychology, anthropology, philosophy, economics, and race. The nature of human beings is to identify with those who look like them in color and culture. Human beings feels comfortable with, as they say, their kind. Imagine an African trying to relate to a German, or a German trying to relate to a Chinese. Every known human group has a somewhat different culture from other groups and socializes their children into internalizing their culture. People generally behave according to their culture. It is easier to relate to those who look like you than those do not look like you. But this is changing fast. Whether we like it or not, a universal human being is emerging. A talk about universal culture is a talk about cultural homogenization. Cultural homogenization happens when powerful global forces, mass media, digital platforms, spread the same products, lifestyles, and ideas across different societies, often overriding local traditions. Instead of a patchwork of distinct cultural expressions, homogenization leads to a world where people eat the same foods, wear the same brands, listen to the same music, and watch the same films. This creates familiarity and shared identity. The KFC example. Take just one example among many: Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC. The KFC you order in London is essentially the same KFC you'll find in Nairobi, Lagos, Cairo, Paris, Amsterdam, La Paz in Bolivia, Windhoek, Chicago, New York, or Athens. The same logo, the same fried chicken recipe, the same packaging. Across continents and cultures, millions of people are consuming an identical food product presented in the same style, under the same global brand. This makes KFC a vivid symbol of cultural homogenization. A local American fast food culture has been globalized, replicated almost everywhere, creating a sense that parts of the world are starting to look and taste very much alike. What if the next great chapter of human culture isn't a clash of civilizations, but an emergence, a higher-order whole forming out of many parts? That's the daring claim we'll explore today, guided by a young Cambridge student who later became a statesman and philosopher, Jan Smuts of South Africa. In 1926, Jan Smuts, this philosopher from South Africa, published Holism and Evolution and gave us a word called holism. Reality advances by creating wholes, each greater than the sum of their parts. What does it mean to belong in the 21st century? To belong to the 21st century is to be dynamic and living within a shared heritage. It is to be connected to the whole world through social media. It is to live in the age of the AI. Stop. Are we members of one global human culture or a mosaic of separate traditions? Imagine walking through a bustling modern city, an Indian curry shop next to a sushi bar, a cafe playing K-pop, and people from every background passing each other with ease. Our world is more connected than at any other time in history. But does that connectivity mean we're moving toward a single, universal human culture? Think of it as a story of humanity. How we adapted in isolation, how we collided through globalization, and how we might perhaps converge into something new. All human beings belong to the same animal species. A species are animals that can reproduce with each other. Europeans can reproduce with Africans and Asians but cannot reproduce with gorillas. For though gorillas look like human beings, they belong to a different species. Biologically speaking, the term race is amorphous and is probably better not employed. However, socially and culturally speaking, clearly there are differences in people. Human beings evolved in different geographical locations in the world. Each geographical location had a different environment compelling animals that want to survive in it to evolve certain biological and cultural mechanisms. Human beings adapted to the peculiarities of their geography. Those who adapted to the cold Arctic region, like Eskimos, adapted differently than those who adapted to the tropical world of Africa, and those who adapted to the temperate world of Western Europe adapted differently from how Africans adapted to their hot milieu culture. Is the sum of what a group of people does to adapt to the exigencies of their world and subsequently pass it to their children to help them adapt to their world. Every known human group has a somewhat different culture from other groups and socializes their children into internalizing their culture. People generally behave according to their culture. Of course, there is individuality within the uniformizing world of culture. Culture is a living thing. It changes to adapt to changed environments. Today's culture is from yesterday's adaptation to the physical and social environment, hence is already dated and ought to be updated with information from our current experiences. These days, as cultures confront each other and are in an existential fight to die or live, some misguided persons see their culture as static and defend it at all times. They cling to what they call their past culture, unaware that that culture is supposed to change the moment it confronts different environments. A culture that is not dynamic does not enable the people to survive, but, in fact, may aid them to die out. Improvements in transportation and communication technologies have made it now possible for individuals to travel all over the world. The individual can be in 3 or 4 continents in as many days. This observer has been in North America, flown to Europe and then Africa, all within 2 days. This means that the cultures of the world are now in close contact. Proximity leads to cultural diffusion, which is taking place at a greater speed than at any other time in human history. In the future, it is clear that there will emerge a universal culture that is not anything like today's particularistic cultures. How do individuals navigate this new world? In the past, identity was simple. You were born into a culture, spoke its language, followed its traditions. Today, identity is fluid. This can be disorienting but also enriching. Studies show bicultural individuals often have greater creativity and flexibility. They can switch between frameworks, see multiple perspectives, and innovate by blending them. Psychologists also talk about global identity, identifying as part of humanity as a whole. People who see themselves this way tend to cooperate more, not less. Far from diluting local loyalty, a global identity can make people more engaged at every level: local, national, and global. Of course, challenges remain. Many feel torn between tradition and modernity, between family expectations and global influences. But increasingly, young people answer the question, "Who am I?" with, "I am many things." Philosophers have long dreamed of humanity united. 2,000 years ago, the Greek thinker Diogenes declared, "I am a citizen of the world." The Stoics believed all humans share reason and should live as part of a single human community. Modern times revived this ideal. After the horrors of World War II, this philosopher from South Africa, Jan Smuts, created a framework for the establishment of the United Nations, framing humanity as the human family. The idea of universal human rights is essentially a call for a shared global ethic. The question is, can we balance universal values with cultural diversity? A universal culture doesn't have to mean sameness. It could mean unity in diversity, shared principles of dignity, fairness, and compassion, expressed through many different local traditions. Think of the Olympics. Athletes compete under different flags, but all participate in one global event. If humanity is to build a universal culture, it must confront race. For centuries, racial categories divided us, fueling slavery, colonialism, and discrimination. Yet science shows we are 99.9% genetically identical. Race is not a biological reality. It is a social construct. A universal culture must dismantle racism. Encouragingly, global culture already amplifies diverse voices. African-American music gave the world jazz, rock, hip-hop. Korean pop music has fans everywhere. The future may bring even more blending. Intermarriage is rising, mixed identities are growing, and old racial categories may gradually lose meaning. A universal culture will need to celebrate diversity, protect heritage, and ensure representation, while also affirming that we are one family. So where are we headed? Picture the next century. With universal internet access and real-time translation, language barriers fade. Children grow up collaborating with peers across continents. Global events, from climate action to cultural festivals, unite billions. Our universal culture may emphasize stewardship of the planet, compassion for others, and creativity that draws from all traditions. It will likely be urban, digital, and plural, blending heritage with innovation. Challenges will remain: inequality, backlash, fear of homogenization. But if we approach globalization consciously, it need not erase cultures. It can elevate them into a shared human heritage. Culture is not a museum piece. It is alive, evolving. For thousands of years, we adapted separately. Now we are adapting together. The future of culture may not be about uniformity, but about harmony. A universal culture built from diversity, grounded in human dignity. Perhaps one day when someone asks, "Where are you from?" the most natural answer will be, "I am from Earth. I am human." And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough.
In America, there is a cultural, not biological phenomenon called white, black, Asian, Native, and Latino peoples. These groups, to the average American, constitute different races. When Americans talk about interracial relationships, they mean people from these apparent different groups relating to one another. I said social, not biological phenomenon. For a person could have white skin color, but if he identifies with Black America and talks like Black Americans do, he would be treated as Black Americans are treated in America, as second-class citizens. In actual fact, however, when people talk about interracial relationships, they are probably talking about the problems people from different cultural backgrounds have in relating to each other. In the not-too-distant past America, the so-called races were legally, not justly, separated and prevented from relating to each other. This apartheid was based on unproven assumptions made about each race. White persons were placed at the apex of the American racial pecking order, and Black persons were placed at the bottom. The other groups were placed in between. To be white in America was to be superior to other races, and to be Black in America was to be inferior to other races, and to be Asian was to be in the middle of the assumed superior white and inferior Black persons. The various groups that constituted the American polity, obviously, internalized the social constructs of whom and what people were, and those assumptions affected their relationship with each other. Until recently, many, if not most Black Americans were taught that they were inferior persons. Whereas most of them probably knew that that idea was wrong. Nevertheless, they were socialized to it and internalized it in varying degrees. The idea of superiority and inferiority affected Americans' social relationship, with those who were socialized to believe that they were superior to others condescending towards those socialized to accept that they were inferior persons. White folks, particularly in the southern states, behaved as if they were superior to Black persons. Until recently, the typical white American had a neurosis, the illusion of his personal superiority to Black persons. In fact, some had a psychosis, the delusion of being superior to Blacks. Inferiority and superiority feeling are delusions, belief in what is not true is true, for the truth is that all people, men and women, Black and white, are the same and are equal. Each human being, beginning from the moment of birth, constructs a self-concept, an idea of who he thinks that he is. He employs his inherited biological given and social experiences as building blocks in constructing his self-concept. Once constructed, the self-concept is translated into a self-image and seen in the individual's mind. The individual also constructs concepts of what he thinks that other people and things are. Generally, the individual sees himself as separated from other people. He sees himself as limited to his body and sees his body as boundaries separating him from other people. He sees himself as living in a world of space, time, and matter. He believes himself weak, puny, and vulnerable, and could be hurt by other people and things, and devotes his life to defending his life via food, medications, clothes, shelter, etc. Our lives on Earth are no more than defense of our bodies and our sense of selves, egos. The self-concept, self-image is the same as personality. Personality is the individual's habitual pattern of behaving, of responding to other people and to the world in general. Generally, personality is formed by age 6 and set in stone by adolescence, and subsequently is difficult to change, except through conversion to religion, to different philosophies of how to live one's life, and or from trauma to the brain that makes the individual to think differently. Generally, people are at 60 who they were at 16. Where there is a personality disorder, such as conflicted pattern of relating to other people, it is apparent by adolescence. See George Kelly, Personality as a Personal Construct. Also see American Psychiatric Association, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 4th edition, section on personality disorders. People have different self-concepts and approach each other with those different concepts. Each person's concepts is individualistic, but is influenced by the idea of race. As Alfred Adler pointed out, there are individuals in every group that feel superior to other persons, and there are those who feel inferior to other persons. There are those with positive self-esteem and those with negative self-esteem, those with high or low self-opinion of who they think that they are. Each human being has different opinion of his worth and value. These feelings are exacerbated by race. A black person who, for any number of reasons, feels inferior will probably feel more inferior as a result of the racial situation in America. A white person who feels superior will probably feel more superior to blacks as a result of the racial situation in America. Clearly, the past de jure and present de facto strictures against interracial mixing in America played a role, and probably still does so, in how people relate to each other across race lines. Consider dating. In America, until recently, folks were encouraged to date and marry only persons from their race and were frowned upon, even punished should they date persons from a different race. This disapproval of interracial dating was particularly serious for Black Americans. Since socially, white persons were deemed superior and black people inferior, for a black person to date a white person was discouraged. Black men who had white girlfriends risked death. Indeed, until the 1960s, such men could be lynched, hung on the nearest tree. Thus, on the whole, there was little overt interracial dating. But this appearance is deceiving. It has been estimated that over 75% of Black Americans had non-black genes. They must have come into being as a result of sexual relationship between white and black persons. In past America, generally, folks had interracial sex in the hide, not in openness. White slave masters had sex with their black female slaves and had children with them, and disowned them, of course. In the cities, it was the case that white men would go to black sections of town to have sex with black women and then go back to their white neighborhoods, to their white wives. This way, white men would have both white children and black children, the later disowned. The recently dead Senator Thurman had black children whom he denied as his children, of course. While the man was fighting racial integration, he was doing his best to integrate the races in the bedroom. Under the cover of darkness, fear and cowardice pervades the interracial sexual situation in America. Folks do one thing and talk about another. Afraid to let the whole world know what they actually do, lest they be socially disapproved. Since white men were in power in America, they could pretty much get away with this sexual charade, but if blacks tried it, it could turn deadly. Black men who had white girlfriends had to hide that fact. It could mean physical death in the hands of white mobs. Indeed, it could also mean social rejection by fellow blacks. Black women particularly hated black men who had white girlfriends, for the implication is that those men preferred white women to them. The sisters are known to ask such brothers, "What has that white bitch got that I don't have? You like them white pussy, nigger?" The least a black man gets for fooling around with a white woman is job insecurity. Many a black man has been fired from his job when his white boss found out that he had a white girlfriend. White men generally reject white women who date black men. As it were, they see such women, often called white trash, as bringing their race downwards, reducing it to the lowly level of niggers. There is a lot of pressure for white women to stay away from black men. Nobody fully understands why people are attracted across racial lines, for despite the pressure to stay away from persons of other races, interracial dating manages to flourish in the land of the Americas. Some white women, like some white men, sneak into black ghettos to have sex with their black lovers. In the past, if these women became pregnant, they had abortion, and if they had children, they most likely gave them up for adoption rather than risk rejection by their fellow whites. These days, with relaxed social opposition to interracial dating, some of these women keep their children. Statistics show that interracial marriages are increasing, though it is still less than 1% in the USA. As far as biology is concerned, there is no such category as races. In so are that there are races, it is social and cultural construct, not a natural one. The social strictures against interracial dating produced a whole lot of psychological issues for those involved. As noted, until recently, white men killed black men who dated white women. Therefore, a black man who, for whatever reason, dated a white woman must be cognizant of the fact that his life may be threatened. Some such black men tended to exhibit paranoid symptoms. They were suspicious, untrusting, and fearful that both whites and blacks could harm them. Many black men with white girlfriends exhibit social paranoia. Some call this phenomenon African Americans' functional paranoia, for there was realistic grounds for them to be cautious of whites. For the later historically did kill blacks who stepped out of line, who did not know their place, as defined for them by their white masters, second-class citizens. That is the history where we come from. Things have changed now. Today, white women find it fun and delightful to having sex with black men. They find them powerful to take them to the neverland of gobs and gobs of pleasure. One world, one culture. Let us talk about that. A holistic journey, from many to one, with Jan Smarts as our compass. What if the next great chapter of human culture isn't a clash of civilizations, but an emergence? A higher order whole forming out of many parts. That's the daring claim we'll explore today, guided by a young Cambridge student who later became a statesman and philosopher, Jan Smarts. In 1926, he published Holism and Evolution and gave us a word, holism, and a lens. Reality advances by creating wholes, each greater than the sum of their parts. We'll use Smuts' holistic compass to navigate the past and present of culture, and to chart a future in which a universal human culture could emerge, not by erasing differences, but by integrating them into a living, creative whole. Smuts' big idea, what holism means for culture. Holism, in Smuts' conception, is not merely togetherness, it is creative integration. Nature evolves by assembling parts into new structures. Atoms into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into organisms. Each leap yields emergent properties that none of the parts possessed alone. A whole does something new. Now extend that to culture. Tribes and villages became city-states. City-states formed nations. And in our time, nations are pressed into interdependence. Holism says this pressure isn't just chaos, it's evolution's crucible. When integration is wise, new wholes emerge. Civic orders, shared meanings, common values, and fresh capacities for collective action. So the question isn't, will cultures mix? They already do. The real question is, will our mixing achieve creative synthesis, an emergent whole that is humane, resilient, and free? Holism insists that the answer depends on how we integrate the parts. From particular to planetary, culture as adaptive holism. Pre-modern peoples lived largely in isolation, adapting to their environments with brilliantly particular solutions. Culture, as an adaptive toolkit, allowed survival in tundra, rainforest, savanna, and desert. By Smuts' lights, each culture was a functional whole. Beliefs, rituals, languages, and arts interlocking to meet local needs. Enter the modern era. Oceans shrink. Journeys compress from months to hours, and the digital ether collapses distance altogether. Holism predicts that when formerly separate wholes enter sustained contact, they either disintegrate or recompose into a larger whole. The engine behind recomposition is creative selection. Societies appropriate what works, shed what fails, and co-create new forms. This is not the bland uniformity of a flattened world. It's the emergence of higher-order integration, a culture of cultures. The multicultural interlude, a necessary but transitional stage. Our present often feels like trench warfare between tradition and globalism. Multiculturalism stepped in as a truce. Many cultures under one roof, each accorded respect. It minimized conflict, but sometimes froze difference in place. Smuts would call that a holding pattern, valuable but incomplete. Holism doesn't stop at coexistence. It seeks co-creation. The parts are honored not as museum pieces, but as living contributors to a more capacious whole. This also sharpens the critique of extreme relativism. Holism refuses to sanctify harmful practices simply because they are traditional. If a practice degrades the persons who compose the whole, it degrades the whole itself. Integration requires normative discernment. We integrate what enhances the flourishing of persons and communities. We retire what corrodes it. Holism is generous, but not naive. America as a case study in cultural holism. If you want to see holistic emergence in cultural form, look at the United States, not as perfection, but as prototype. It is a crucible that has repeatedly integrated waves of difference: European legal ideas, African musical genius, indigenous ecological knowledge, Asian philosophies, Latin rhythms, into a culture with novel properties, outsized creativity in music and film, scientific dynamism, and a civic narrative that, when true to itself, expands membership. Where America falters, holism supplies diagnosis. Exclusion is anti-holistic because it suppresses parts whose contributions unlock the emergent capacities of the whole. Racial inequity isn't merely a moral failure, it's a systems failure that throttles national potential. Incorporation, real, equal, dignified, isn't charity. It's the precondition of the next emergent American whole. Psychology of the emerging whole. Selves that contain multitudes. Holism applies to persons, too. Individuals are wholes integrating body, mind, memory, aspiration, and culture. In our century, many people become bicultural or multicultural selves. They code switch, synthesize, and innovate. Studies consistently find that such integration increases cognitive flexibility and creative output. Under a holistic lens, that's expected. The more richly the parts are integrated, the more the person becomes capable of emergent responses, new ways to solve old problems. Global identity need not dilute local belonging. Holism rejects zero-sum thinking. The integrated self can be proudly Zulu and proudly South African and proudly human, without contradiction, because the higher-order self is the coherence of all that is true in its parts. Anthropology reframed. Diffusion as evolutionary upshift. Classic anthropology documented how cultures borrow, foods, instruments, myths, technologies, travel. Holism says diffusion is not mere copying. It's recomposition. When West African rhythmic structures migrated into the Americas via unspeakable trauma, they met European harmony and instrumentation, and something new emerged: blues, jazz, rock, and hip-hop. The parts did not cancel. They catalyzed. Today's accelerants, jet travel, streaming media, real-time translation, multiply catalytic encounters. Not everything that spreads should stay. Discernment matters. But instead of guarding purity, holism invites an art of curation. Retain the life-giving, retire the life-denying, and keep the system open for ongoing emergence. Economics through a holistic lens. Why diversity out-innovates uniformity. Complex systems evolve faster when they have high variety and high connectivity. Economies are no different. Heterogeneous teams outperform monocultures because they surface non-overlapping heuristics. Immigration, when well integrated, increases entrepreneurial density. Dense urban hubs become idea reactors. Holism frames inclusion as competitive advantage. The more fully a society integrates the capabilities of women, minorities, migrants, and marginalized groups, the more emergent capacity it unlocks. Exclusion is economically irrational because it prevents the system from discovering better combinations of its parts. Race and the moral grammar of integration. Holism gives us a clear ethic. A whole cannot flourish by degrading its parts. Racism breaks the integrative covenant. It wastes human capital and fractures trust. A universal culture cannot emerge on the foundation of hierarchy. Not because hierarchy is unfashionable, but because it is anti-holistic. It makes the whole less than the sum of its parts. The way forward is not color blindness that pretends differences don't matter. It is color-honoring integration that invites the distinctive gifts of each tradition into common purpose. That is the moral core of cultural holism. Guardrails. What holism is not. Holism isn't a license for imperial, we-know-best projects. Integration can be violent if the whole is imposed rather than emergent. True holism proceeds dialogically, consensually, iteratively. It also isn't romanticism. Smuts himself could be accused of teleological optimism. We must temper that with realism. Systems can regress. Integration can fail. But failure argues for better integration, not for retreat into fragments. Holism also isn't homogenization. A symphony is not a single note. The richest wholes preserve distinctiveness within coherence. That's the art, unity without uniformity. Practice of cultural holism, how we build the next whole. If holism is to guide a planetary culture, what practical disciplines move us from many to one? Integrative education. Teach children comparative culture, world history as interwoven, and systems thinking. Train them to spot emergent patterns, not just memorize parts. Language and translation. Invest in multilingualism and universal translation, so parts can actually converse. Conversation is the metabolism of integration. Civic platforms for co-creation. Deliberative forums, citizens' assemblies, cross-border hackathons, spaces where difference doesn't just coexist, but produces shared solutions. Inclusive institutions, from universities to parliaments to media, measure success by how well institutions incorporate and elevate underrepresented voices into agenda-setting roles. Cultural curation, a public philosophy that prizes life-enhancing traditions and retires harmful rights, done locally by the communities themselves with open deliberation rather than top-down edict. Urban design for contact, cities engineered for mixing, public squares, festivals, affordable transit, because emergence requires encounters. We need stories large enough to hold plural identities. Smuts offered one. Evolution toward higher wholes. Retell it for our century, a human family learning to compose difference into shared strength. The United States, China, Africa, 3 holistic challenges. United States. The synthesis is real but incomplete. To unlock its next emergent whole, America must practice deep inclusion, equal education, equal justice, equal economic access. Its hallmark virtues: free inquiry, entrepreneurial churn, artistic fusion, are holistic strengths that grow as membership expands. China. Extraordinary integrative capacity internally, but cultural homogeneity is a risk factor for innovation at scale. Holism suggests long-term vitality will require greater openness to external difference, more porous flows of ideas, people, and cultural forms. Africa. As the youngest continent with vast cultural variety, Africa is a living laboratory of integration, from Nollywood to Afrobeats to Pan-African tech hubs. The task is to federate its riches without erasing local genius, to build wholes, regional markets, research networks, cultural platforms that amplify the continent's plural vitality. 12. Beyond multiculturalism, toward integrative universalism. Multiculturalism said, let differences live side by side. Integrative universalism says, let differences create something together. It asks for a shared moral floor, dignity, nonviolence, fairness, truth-telling, upon which endlessly diverse cultural ceilings can be built. This is a universalism grounded not in domination, but in reciprocity, not in sameness, but in co-authorship. If the word universal makes anyone nervous, substitute Smuts' word, holistic. The universal we seek is simply the whole we build together. 13. The person as proof. If you're listening to this and you're a child of 2 cultures, or you've lived in multiple cities, or you speak more than one language, you are already living proof of cultural holism. Your mind integrates frameworks. Your playlists mix continents. Your friendships cross borders. You are a microcosm of the macrocosm to come. Scale that up. 1 million, 1 billion, several billions of such integrated persons constitute the substrate on which a universal culture can stably emerge. 14. A holistic ending, many in one. Let's end where Smuts would, with evolution as a movement toward more inclusive wholes. Culture is not a museum. It is metabolism. It lives by digesting experience into meaning. For thousands of years, we digested locally. Now, for the first time, the entire species sits at one table. The temptation is to protect our plates. The invitation is to share recipes and cook together. A universal human culture worthy of the name will not be a gray, flavorless paste. It will be a feast. Many cuisines, one table. Many instruments, one orchestra. Many languages, one conversation. That is holism's promise. Parts preserved, powers combined, a whole that can do what none of us alone can do. Solve civilizational problems at civilizational scale, and make more beauty than any single tradition could craft in isolation. Not from many to one as a subtraction. From many into one as a creation. If that sounds idealistic, remember, emergence is the oldest story in the universe. It's how hydrogen became stars, and how voices become a chorus. Holism says the next movement is ours to compose. The score is open. The baton is in our hands. Let's conduct. If you want, I can adapt this into a shorter keynote version, a 2-host conversation outline, or a chapterized audio series. 4 15-minute episodes that deepens each section, still anchored in Smuts' holism. Until recent centuries, most human societies developed in relative isolation, barely aware of distant peoples. Africans, for example, had little to no contact with Europeans or Asians in pre-modern times. Each community adapted to its local environment and evolved a distinct culture suited to its survival needs. Anthropologists note that cultural practices often arise as adaptive responses to environmental challenges. In other words, people in a temperate European climate developed different lifeways than those in a tropical African climate, each culture tailoring itself to the demands of its physical world. These particularistic cultures served their purpose in their time, enabling communities to cope with local realities. Fast forward to today, technology has effectively shrunk the world into a global village. Improvements in transportation and communications have dramatically accelerated the pace of globalization. A person can fly from North America to Europe to Africa in the span of 2 days, collapsing distances that once kept civilizations apart for millennia. As a result, cultures that evolved separately are now coming into direct contact and sometimes collision at an unprecedented speed. We are witnessing the early stages of what may become a universal global culture, a blending of many particular cultures into one evolving, dynamic tapestry shared by all humanity. This article offers a wide-ranging exploration of this phenomenon from sociological, psychological, anthropological, philosophical, economic, and racial perspectives. Culture has always been a living, dynamic phenomenon rather than a fixed set of traditions. In traditional anthropology, cultures were understood as integrated systems that helped people adapt to their environment. For example, societies relying on reindeer herding in Arctic tundra developed norms, tools, and beliefs very different from rice farming communities in monsoon Asia or hunter-gatherers in African rainforests. Yet, despite their differences, all cultures serve the same basic function. They help humans meet their biological and social needs in a given context. Culture is humanity's primary adaptive mechanism, our way of responding to hunger, climate, predators, and social coordination challenges in diverse environments. Crucially, culture is dynamic and not static. Anthropologists emphasize that culture constantly changes in response to both internal and external factors. New inventions, population shifts, or environmental changes can trigger transformations in how people live and think. No culture is frozen in time. Even those that pride themselves on tradition have in fact evolved continuously, albeit sometimes gradually. For instance, consider how dramatically European cultures changed from medieval times to the industrial age, or how indigenous societies adopted new foods and tools when introduced via trade. Cultural change can be deliberate adaptation or unconscious drift, but it is inevitable. Culture is a living thing. It grows, adapts, or withers depending on circumstances. A community that clings rigidly to yesterday's ways despite a changing environment risks maladaptation. History is littered with societies that collapsed or got conquered, in part because they failed to innovate or adjust their cultural practices when necessary. In short, flexibility is a hallmark of cultural longevity, whereas rigidity can lead to stagnation or even extinction. Resisting change, the peril of cultural stagnation. Despite the inherent fluidity of culture, there are always those who view their culture as immutable. In times of rapid change, some people feel threatened and cling tightly to an idealized past. They insist on defending the way we've always done it, treating culture as something sacred and fixed. This defensive posture is understandable. Culture is deeply tied to identity and comfort, but it can be misguided if it ignores new realities. A cultural practice that was well adapted to the past may become maladaptive in a new context. If climate, technology, or contact with other societies alters one's world, refusing to update cultural norms can leave a group ill-equipped for the present. As one scholar bluntly put it, culture is the last refuge of the scoundrel. When people run out of rational arguments, they often retreat behind cries of cultural tradition. Such appeals can mask a refusal to progress or to admit flaws in one's inherited ways. Cultures that insist on remaining static risk being left behind or even aided to die out, as harsh as that sounds. A dramatic example is the isolationist Tokugawa Japan era, which fell behind Western powers technologically due to centuries of self-imposed cultural stasis, requiring a rapid forced modernization in the Meiji era to survive. In the modern world, no society can afford to seal itself off and freeze in time. The currents of change are too strong. The most successful cultures have been those that remained open and dynamic, borrowing useful ideas from others and innovating from within. Indeed, cultural borrowing and diffusion have always been engines of progress. From the adoption of agriculture to the spread of religions and technologies, cultures that exchange traits tend to become more resilient and sophisticated.
Chapter 5. The War Between Men and Women. When you place the mature woman beside the frigid woman, the questions arrive like hail. Why do some women become frigid? Has this always plagued womankind, or is it a wound of our age? And if true sexual freedom is so sweet, why do some cling to the block even when help is near? To answer honestly, you must know some history. Every individual case is psychological, yes, but the raw materials of those psychologies were poured by social forces, and over the last 2 centuries they have been uniquely destructive to women. If you see this clearly, your own story will stop feeling like a puzzle and start looking like a map. What follows is the history of a war, bitter, relentless, fought in public, in parlors, and finally inside women's bodies. Call it what it is, the war between men and women. In too many households, it still rages. Before the war, the home that once was. The match that lit this war was struck at the end of the 18th century. The spark was seemingly harmless, the steam engine. Yet the Industrial Revolution it powered inverted almost everything: work, class, the city, the country, the way we made things, and the way we made meaning. To understand its cost, see the world from just before it. Society was largely rural. The home was the center of life. Most homes were farms, and even in towns, industry meant home industry. Clothes were woven and cut within the house. Food was grown and stored there. Tools were mended there. A man built his own walls. A woman spun, wove, cooked, brewed, laundered, and kept the whole enterprise breathing. Children learned at the mother's side. Reading and sums, yes, but also the full set of crafts that sustained a family. The woman's role was not decorative. It was central. If she faltered, the home faltered. If she died, disaster followed. She was needed, respected, indispensable. Where such need exists, sexual self-respect grows naturally. She was a woman in a home where womanhood mattered. In that economy, frigidity scarcely appears as a concept. Love, work, and family were integrated. Being needed nourished the feminine soul. Neededness, in turn, fed responsiveness, body and heart, the dispossession. Then the machines came. Factories bloomed, and men left the house to feed the mills. Manufactured goods displaced the woman's craft. The home's economic heart was pulled outside its walls. Schools removed the children from her daily tutelage. Slowly, steadily, the domestic center was hollowed out. At first, only a few felt it. Then it spread across classes and counties until no home remained untouched. Women woke to find themselves dispossessed of their economic role, their authoritative partnership with their husbands, their daily primacy with their children. The very structure that had affirmed their feminine worth was dismantled. She felt her womanhood itself devalued. Then she reacted, with a rage that took 2 forms. 2 reactions, 1 war. The public front. Feminism as masculinization. One reaction was loud and militant. It announced itself in pamphlets, speeches, and platforms. The argument ran thus: if the world no longer values woman's distinct role, the answer is simple. Become like men. Seek the same schooling, the same work, the same standards, the same powers, the same permissions. Reject anything that smells of specialness. In principle, some aims were corrective and sane. Abuses needed redress. But the spirit hardened around a deeper message. Female fulfillment equals approximation to maleness. Motherhood was recast as a trap, marriage as a contract to break at will. Sexual liberty, measured by male license, became the banner. The practical creed: exchange husband for boss, child for schedule, home for office, dependence on love for dependence on wage. The feminine was not defended. It was disowned. The result? Women won many public victories, and yet became no happier for it. Because beneath the reforms, the hostility to femaleness remained. To deny the feminine design in the name of freedom is not liberation. It is self-rejection dressed in new clothes. The private front, Victorian denial. The second reaction was quiet, but equally fierce. Victorian woman, wounded by dispossession, retaliated unconsciously by denying female sexuality altogether. She declared passion a male province and enshrined female frigidity as moral hygiene. Scientists of the day solemnly nodded along. Women learned to blush at their bodies, dread menstruation, and hide any hunger they might feel, especially from themselves. Victorian frigidity died publicly with the Great War. Its ghost did not. It still breathes in the shame that clings to female pleasure, in the contempt some mothers pass to daughters about bodies, cycles, pregnancy, and birth, the double inheritance. Modern women, then, inherit a pair of poisons. From the Victorian, a conviction that a good woman is unsexual, cold by design. From the masculinizing feminist, a conviction that the male role is the only respectable destiny. So drop your femaleness and compete, resent, supplant. Put either conviction in a marriage and watch the war move into the bedroom. Put it in a nursery and watch it move into the next generation. I have treated women raised by each type of mother. The lessons they absorbed were chillingly consistent. Shame about the body, disgust for menstruation, terror of pregnancy, punishment for childish curiosity about sex, contempt for the father as a figure to love or emulate. The result is predictable. Loathing of womanhood and a nervous system that clamps shut when love asks it to open. It is no surprise, then, that so many psychiatrists agree on the source of much private misery, the childhood home, and within it, the woman's attitude, conscious or unconscious, toward femaleness, men, and love. How the war enters the bed. Women often admit their lack of orgasm. Harder for them is to admit the attitudes that drive it. Chronic opposition to the husband, competition instead of companionship, the quiet scorn that withers desire at the root. A case. A university historian came to me declaring that orgasmlessness was her only problem. To hear her tell it, the marriage was ideal. Her husband, seen separately, described a house combative to the bone. Constant contradiction, fights that left the eldest child twitching, pregnancies riddled with fear and followed by depression. None of this surprised me. The sexual anesthesia had announced it. When she finally saw that she had been married to the war, not to her husband, tenderness returned, and with it the body's permission to surrender. Another case. A woman, incandescent with rage, informed me that her husband would crawl, on hands and knees, before forgiveness. She had been totally frigid since their wedding night. In her mind she was spotless. He was culprit. I told her the history I am telling you now. How for 150 years, women have been instructed to reject their design, and then blame men for the misery that ensues. She listened, first hostile, then stricken, then newly sober. She began the only work that ever works, taking responsibility for her attitudes and changing them. Divorce was never mentioned again. Healing proceeded. Seeing one's responsibility is hard. Refusing it is fatal. It is to choose sexual suicide and call it morality. The flapper and the fallout. Victorianism's public grip broke. Masculinized freedom took the stage. The flapper was its cartoon, a woman wearing a man's mask. The fashion faded. The philosophy did not. For decades, girls have been tutored to devalue homemaking. Motherhood, patience, tenderness, and the joy of giving, all dismissed as lesser. In their place, rivalry with men, and the pursuit of male-shaped trophies. What has this produced? Not peace, not warmth. We have harvested restlessness, a rising divorce rate, neurotic children, confused sons, hardened daughters, and yes, frigidity by the millions. A society cannot train women to oppose their nature and expect love to thrive. Turn and live. If this is the tide that carried you here, turn. You will not find much applause for it. The war still has many recruiters, but you do not need applause. You need results. For a century and a half, women have blamed the outside world and refused the inner audit. If the blame had bought happiness, we could debate its merit. It has not. It has bought loneliness, blocked desire, endless skirmishes with the only man whose arms you actually want. The cure is not a slogan. It is a conversion of attitude, from opposition to partnership, from masculinization to feminine fullness, from blaming outward to working inward, from the ideology of coldness or rivalry to the practice of surrender, generosity, and erotic trust. This is not passivity. It is strength aimed in the right direction. When a woman stops warring with her own nature, the bedroom warms, the home steadies, and the children breathe easier. The body follows the heart. The orgasm follows the truth. Drop the war. Choose your design. It is not a step backward. It is the only step forward that leads to love.
The American melting pot as a microcosm of a universal culture, sociological and racial perspective. If we seek a preview of what a successfully blended universal culture might look like, the United States of America offers an illustrative case. The U.S., often dubbed a melting pot, has since its founding absorbed people from every corner of the world. It is already something of a veritable United Nations, with hundreds of ethnicities and cultural backgrounds represented within one society. Over generations, immigrants in America did not remain entirely in isolated enclaves. Their cultures interacted and eventually fused into a distinct American culture that continuously evolves. American culture is thus an amalgam, built from European Enlightenment ideals, indigenous American influences, African rhythms and creativity, Latin American flavors, Asian philosophies and cuisines, and so on. This gives it a unique universalistic character. In fact, the multiple cultural roots of American society are a source of soft power advantage. Its European component appeals to Europeans, its Latino element appeals to Latin Americans, its African American element appeals to Africans, its Asian element appeals to AsianSocialistRegister.com. Because America contains facets of many cultures, its cultural exports, from music to movies, often resonate broadly across the world. One could say American culture is what global culture looks like in nascent form. A patchwork that anyone can find a piece of themselves in. It's important to note that America's diversity has been a huge strength, though not without challenges. Homogeneous societies like China or Japan cannot easily compete with heterogeneous societies like the U.S. in cultural dynamism. Why? Diversity means cross-pollination of ideas and perspectives, which spurs innovation and creativity. Anthropologist Joe Henrich points out that cultural evolution thrives on variation and exchange. An environment where different cultures challenge and combine with each other generates more new ideas, whereas small homogeneous societies become less dynamic and even regress. Populismstudies.org. He gives the example that the United States led the world in cutting-edge innovations in the 20th century precisely because its relatively free immigration and trade policies allowed for a rapid, free flow of information among diverse groups. Populismstudies.org. In other words, America's openness to peoples from around the world created a fertile ground for progress, from scientific breakthroughs in its universities to jazz music in its city streets. By contrast, a culturally closed society might miss out on fresh inputs and outside-the-box thinking. One vivid area where America's mixed culture has excelled is popular music. Virtually all globally influential American music genres, jazz, blues, rock and roll, hip-hop, sprang from the African American experience, often blending African rhythmic and musical sensibilities with European instruments or harmonic structures. The African contribution to modern music cannot be overstated. As one cultural analysis notes, African rhythm introduced in all modern music is a force, without which it would be impossible to transmit the movement and anguish of modern life. Armando Martinjanira.net indeed. The heartbeat of African diasporic rhythm underlies everything from pop and R&B to rock and EDM today. This exemplifies how one culture's particular genius, in this case, West African-derived rhythm and oral tradition, transformed and energized a new universal art form. It's hard to imagine global popular culture today without the influences of African American music, which, in turn, has roots in Africa. And this process is ongoing. Think of how Latin American dance rhythms, salsa, reggaeton, or Asian K-pop have recently globalized. A universal culture is being built collaboratively, with different peoples contributing their creativity to a shared global repertoire. However, the American experiment also shows the challenges that must be overcome to fully harness diversity's benefits. The United States has long struggled with racism and inequitable inclusion of all its cultural groups. African Americans, despite their outsized contributions to national culture and wealth, often literally through unpaid labor in slavery times, were marginalized and discriminated against for centuries. Other immigrant groups, Irish, Italians, Jews, Asians, Latinos, also faced periods of exclusion or prejudice. If and when America finally and truly incorporates all its peoples as equal partners, shedding systemic racism and valuing each group's talents, it would unleash an even greater creative and economic force. Studies have quantified the cost of racial discrimination. One report found the U.S. economy lost an estimated $16 trillion over the past 20 years due to racial gaps in education, wages, and investment. CBSNews.com. Conversely, closing those racial gaps today could add $5 trillion to U.S. GDP over just the next 5 years. CBSNews.com. In plain terms, prejudice is expensive and wasteful. It squanders human potential that would benefit the whole society. An America that genuinely empowers its minority populations, providing equal education, opportunity, and justice, would gain immensely in innovation, talent, and unity. As one economic analysis put it, ending racial inequality is not only about justice, but about choosing a more dynamic future and realizing the full potential of a massively underutilized source of talent, to the benefit of all Americans. McKinsey.com. Looking ahead, an inclusive American culture that melds the best of European, African, Asian, Latin, and Native American traditions could remain one of the most vibrant and influential in the world. Some even speak of America's cultural imperialism, the way American media and lifestyle permeate globally. But notably, it is an imperialism by attraction, soft power, more than coercion. The reason American culture exports so well is exactly that it's a hybrid with something for everyone. Socialistregister.com. Rather than being a static old world culture, it's an adaptive new world one that keeps changing with its diverse populace. If China aspires to similar global cultural appeal in the 21st century, one might argue it will need to embrace more diversity within, to move from a largely homogeneous society to a more pluralistic one. China's growing interest in African and foreign collaborations could be seen as an attempt to infuse new influences, though it remains to be seen how far that goes. In any case, the U.S. provides both a model of synergy born from diversity and a cautionary tale of the frictions when equality lags diversity. The takeaway is that diversity is a strength only when coupled with inclusion. A melting pot works best if all ingredients are allowed to fully cook together, enriching the flavor of the whole. As cultures converge, individuals face the psychological task of navigating differences and forming their identity amid plurality. In earlier eras, a person might live their whole life within one cultural worldview, rarely encountering anyone who thought or lived very differently. Now, in a single day, one might interact with coworkers from 5 national backgrounds or debate opinions with strangers worldwide online. This requires a new level of cultural awareness and sensitivity on the part of individuals. Psychologists and educators talk about developing intercultural competence or cultural intelligence, CQ, the ability to understand and adapt to people from different cultural backgrounds. This skill set involves empathy, open-mindedness, knowledge of other cultures, and the flexibility to adjust one's communication style or behavior to bridge cultural gaps. In an increasingly global society, intercultural competence has become an indispensable asset, enhancing communication and creativity, and even being highly sought by employers. Someone comfortable in multicultural settings can work on diverse teams more effectively, solve problems with a broader perspective, and avoid misunderstandings that arise from cultural misinterpretations. For example, learning that East Asian cultures value indirect communication and saving face, whereas Western cultures often prize directness, can help one tailor their message to avoid offense and achieve understanding. These are subtle psychological adjustments, but they make a big difference in building trust across cultural divides. On a personal identity level, many people today develop hybrid identities. A child of immigrant parents might grow up bilingual, feeling at home in 2 cultures. Or a globe-trotting professional may consider themselves a cosmopolitan blend of all places they've lived. Rather than identity being a single fixed label, I am only X culture, individuals increasingly see themselves as composite. I'm a global citizen with roots in X and Y, influenced by Z. This can be challenging. There may be moments of culture shock, confusion, or feeling like you don't fully belong to any one group. Yet it can also be enriching and liberating, as one is not confined to a single cultural script. Psychologically, humans are remarkably capable of holding multiple cultural frameworks and switching between them as context demands, a phenomenon called code switching.
Chapter 7: Anatomy and Destiny. We have named 2 major reasons women are deflected from full sexual maturity. Now we must speak of a third, equally decisive, and to many women, the most uncomfortable to face because it hides inside apparent success. I have already introduced the clitoridal woman. Now I must state plainly the implications. The female body contains 2 potential sites of orgasmic discharge, the clitoris and the vagina. This simple anatomical fact has vast psychological consequences because it offers a young woman, unconsciously, 2 paths, one that grows her into full womanhood, and one that strands her on an early shore. A man has one sexual organ for climax, the penis. There is no anatomical alternative. If early shocks block him, he becomes impotent, an unmistakable calamity, and his whole being rouses to reclaim potency. The pain motivates him. A woman's anatomy is more forgiving at first, and more treacherous in the long run. The mature woman's orgasm is vaginal. Her climax takes place within the canal, with the whole body answering, and it marks a personality that has ripened into true womanhood. The clitoral orgasm is localized on the clitoris. It excludes the vagina's participation, often runs independent of the penis, and is available early in development. If the growing girl becomes frightened of vaginal surrender, for any of the reasons we have already traced, she can block the vaginal pathway while continuing to enjoy clitoral release. Because she has never tasted the deeper thing, she does not miss it. Because she does not miss it, she does not seek it. Biology becomes destiny, with psychology as accomplice. Over time, the cul-de-sac deepens. Habits groove. By the age when she is ready for marriage, she has often built, unknowingly, a full neurosis to defend both her childish gratifications and her childish emotional needs. She arrives at the altar unripe, and the marriage suffers. Let me be unequivocal. A woman confined to clitoral orgasm is, in the psychiatric sense, frigid. Exact statistics are lacking. Clinical experience suggests it is widespread, perhaps the most common form of female frigidity in our society. Unhappily, recent decades have not helped. The popular reading of Kinsey insisted there is no meaningful difference between clitoral and vaginal orgasm, or worse, that all female orgasm is clitoral. Psychiatry's best observers, 60 years of careful study, have consistently found the opposite. The distinction is real, universal, and personality relevant. When women brandish Kinsey to defend a clitoral fixation, they wrap themselves in science against their own growth. I have heard it many times in my office. So have my colleagues. Why is this so dangerous? Because most other forms of frigidity eventually hurt enough to force a reckoning. The clitoridal woman is comfortable enough to drift. She can ruin a life sweetly, never knowing why closeness cools, why tenderness thins, why marriage turns gray. Complacency is her chief risk. Therefore, I counsel such women to be more than usually suspicious of their own rationalizations, more than usually brave about naming the problem, and more than usually insistent on moving through it. First truth, there is nothing shameful here. You did not choose immaturity. Your body, offered 2 routes, took the safer road under the press of fear and misinformation. Adults around you likely misinformed you. You are not to blame for how the knot was tied. You are responsible for untying it now. Name the fact. Clitoral fixation is immaturity. Not moral failing, developmental arrest. The joys beyond it are not imaginary, and they are not frightening. They are the ordinary privileges of a completed feminine sexuality. One practical lever that often helps: see the husband. Women with this fixation routinely insist, even when they understand their immaturity, that their husbands do not mind prolonged manual stimulation, perhaps even prefer it. In my practice, that has never proved true. A husband whose wife moved from clitoral fixation to vaginal orgasm told me recently, "I feel like a man again." Your wife's response in intercourse, that's everything. If she can't, you slowly lose faith in yourself. Then you lose interest in making love. Another, earlier in treatment and very tired, said, If there were no end in sight to this kid stuff, the endless stroking, I think I'd give up on sex. It's lost its fun. He was not petty. He was human. And yet, here is an important counterweight. Men tolerate this for a long time. I have not seen marriages end for this reason alone. The greater danger is subtler. The woman rejects the man, withholding, postponing, bristling, rather than face her problem. She pushes him away without knowing she is doing it. The hallmark of clitoridal fixation is evasion, looking anywhere but at the truth, trying everything but what works. I have watched women chase drugs, surgeries, hormone shots, even yoga regimens as if the body could be tricked into maturity while the mind dug in its heels. I have also watched them turn to glossy manuals that prescribe a carnival of positions, as if variety could heal a phobia. Variety is delightful for healthy lovers. It is not a cure for a block. The entire Kama Sutra cannot undo a clitoral fixation. Attempting it as cure invites one more failure and one more sigh. Another common fear I want to lay to rest, because it terrifies needlessly. Doctor, I think I'm homosexual. A young nurse said this to me between sobs. She had been married a year. She could not climax in intercourse. She required prolonged clitoral stimulation. Her evidence for homosexuality? A dream of hugging her head nurse and feeling warm and safe. And, at 12, mutual touching with a girlfriend. We set the record straight. She was not homosexual. A lesbian woman prefers women, falls in love with women, and has no true interest in men. That was not her. Her dream simply expressed a wish for a mothering figure to protect her through a frightening passage, a wish she unconsciously assigned to me by choosing a woman psychiatrist. Childhood play of that sort is common, and unless it persists into adolescence and beyond, generally harmless. Do not frighten yourself with ghost stories. Why the confusion? Early on, many girls equate clitoris with penis. It stands out, it behaves, it gives local pleasure, so the mind slides into the fantasy. If my pleasure is here, perhaps I am like a boy. Perhaps I must want girls. No, your clitoris is not a little penis. It is part of the female apparatus, meant to awaken you toward the vagina, not instead of it. We will return to this in treatment with care. Let me summarize the ground we have covered across the last 3 chapters, because together they explain why female frigidity is so frequent, and why it is so curable, biological asymmetry. The male orgasm is a biological necessity for conception. The female orgasm is not required for the race to continue. Thus, female orgasm is more vulnerable to psychological storm, fear, shame, misinformation, than the male's. Maternal awe and dread. Motherhood requires a woman to outrun self-preservation, placing her child before herself in 1,000 ways. Mishandled in a girl's mind, this becomes terror, and terror teaches the pelvis to close. Fear of maternity is the quickest road to frigidity, dual orgasmic potential. Women possess 2 potential routes to release. The clitoral route is early and infantile. The vaginal route is mature and fulfills the design of feminine sexuality. Millions are stalled at the first because it offers enough pleasure to avoid change. None of this is cause for self-contempt. It is cause for clarity and action. You did not invent your anatomy or your upbringing. You can decide what to do next. And what comes next is neither exotic nor humiliating. It is a progression every mature woman has already taken. Knowledge, attitude, practice, and the steady abandonment of fear until the body discovers what it was made to do. Your anatomy is not your jailer. Properly understood, it is your map. Follow it past the cul-de-sac and into the wide road. The life waiting there is not theoretical. It is warm and immediate, and it belongs to you.